I don't know how much space we have. Anyway, I'll get back to a little bit of that. I actually took notes here because I haven't had to do anything on Bordeaux in a little while. They produce a wide range of styles. We're most familiar with red, but they make some really great whites. About 90% of these wines are bone dry. They do produce some sweet wine. I'll talk about those wines towards the end, but those are some of the really great values in Bordeaux and some of the really great wines in the world that just really get overlooked. I would say when we're looking at Bordeaux, we would break this kind of down into 3 regions. And the reason we do that is there's 2 major rivers that go through, the Dordogne and the Garonne. And there's a confluence there as they move towards the Atlantic Ocean. And this creates I guess I'd call it a large island that they refer to as the Entrée de Mer, which makes a lot of sense in that it translates to roughly 2 seas, between 2 seas. And that's where you see a huge amount of the grapes grown. And then on the right bank, you'll hear in Bordeaux, you'll hear things referred to as the right and left bank. On the right bank, this is on the river Dordogne, and the left bank is on the Garonne. And then looking across either of those rivers, you would see Entrée de Mer. Entrée de Mer, it's not really special in most ways. It's where you see a lot of the generic wines of Bordeaux come out of. It's lower in quality. It's lower in quality as a whole. That doesn't mean that the wine's necessarily bad, and it's very inexpensive. And we're talking inexpensive to the point of maybe you're paying a couple euros a bottle sometimes. But again, there's some of the larger chateaus will have well-maintained plantings that they'll use in some of what we would call their second wines, and I'll cover that a little bit more in a few minutes. Bordeaux is a region that I would personally say is defined by climate. And the reason is that it's basically right on the Atlantic Ocean. There's a pine forest that separates it, but otherwise it's susceptible to the positives and negatives of all the influences that the ocean can have. As we talked about, I guess I'll go back to some of the things we talked about and why the producer couldn't be with us. It's susceptible to springtime frosts. It's susceptible to hail. That's becoming more frequent occurrence in most regions in France. And I think people attribute that largely to climate changing. That's created a little bit more of a turbulent climate, especially in eastern France, but it's definitely affected Bordeaux heavily in the last couple of years. And then being on the ocean, as we all know here in Oregon and Washington, that can lead to a lot of rain, and it's really not a lot different for Bordeaux. In fact, they get rain probably at worse times than we would get here in the west side of the mountains. And because of that, they have a lot of mold and mildew problems on their grapevines, and that has led to them having to do more spraying, which tends to be with copper sulfate to mitigate that. But you'll see in times of either copper shortages or when copper goes up in price, the quality of Bordeaux can fluctuate with that because some producers can't afford to use that sprays on the lower end. From a overall climate standpoint, you would consider this a marginal maritime climate, and that really has influenced the history from the perspective of what grapes they chose to grow. And they had to think about it while we're in a little bit warmer period in the globe as a whole. You know, maybe when they were working on planting a few hundred years back, it wasn't quite as warm. And so here, with it being marginal, they were oftentimes hedging their bets by planting a wide variety of grapes. And some years their reds wouldn't ripen at all, and they would be using, they would be relying on whites for sales. By and large, they hedged that even more by planting red grapes that would ripen early. And there were also a bunch of people who liked a lot of pain because they picked some really challenging red grapes to ripen that had become more staples as the globe has warmed a little bit for them. And now we don't necessarily think of ripening being as much of an issue as it once was. The most well-known grapes that we have in Bordeaux for the red are Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cab Franc. There are other reds that have come from there. They still have some small plantings, but have definitely become more well-known in other areas. And we've talked about a few of these because they're doing well in Washington. But outside of Washington, Malbec has become really well-known, and that was originally a Bordelais grape. It's become the grape of Argentina. Carmenere spread from Bordeaux. They thought it was extinct because they couldn't find it in Bordeaux anymore, but lo and behold, it made its way to Chile, and now it's kind of the national grape of Chile and doing some really nice things there. And then Petit Verdot is another grape that was originally in Bordeaux. And I would say, honestly, Washington is probably making some of the best Petit Verdot in the world. And a lot of these grapes grow really well here. But still to this day really struggle in Bordeaux, though they do occasionally pop up. White wine, we're looking at Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, and Muscadel. And all of these, I think, are really fabulous grapes in Bordeaux, and it's wines that we don't necessarily see often or enough of here. And those are wines I would recommend kind of seeking out. I think you get a lot of really good value out of those wines. The cool part about this marginal climate is, unlike most regions in France and really a lot of Europe, Bordeaux is kind of the home of blending wine. And this was in a lot of ways, just totally out of necessity, because often one grape wouldn't ripen and another would, and they still wanted to be able to use all of them from a monetary standpoint. And so they would blend it to make a palatable wine. Back then, they probably were having to age them a lot longer to get them to be palatable. But nowadays, that's still held true with blends. And really, you'll very rarely see a single varietal. You'll never see it labeled as such, but you'll very rarely see a single varietal Bordeaux wine. Outside of just the pure climatic differences, you'll still see all these grapes planted in the same vineyard. And in a year like this, where we had frost problems, they're probably very happy that they had these grapes planted in the same vineyard. As Merlot will bud early, but Cab Sauv will bud maybe 2 weeks or even a little later than that, sometimes after. So while one may have frost problems or be susceptible to it, the other one usually dodges the frost. And so this year, I'm not exactly sure where they were in the budding process, but you'll probably see either more Merlot dominant wines or more Cab Sauv dominant wines because of the frosts. I don't know how many of you guys were on. We were talking about this a few weeks back, a little bit for a few minutes on one of the calls. And a really cool picture that I don't know if you have that you can share is that smudge pot picture.
Potentially.
Yeah, pop that up real quick. The smudge pots are one of the ways they mitigate frost issues by essentially lighting a bunch of small fires and trying to force the disruption of the cold air pockets by convection. Give them 1 second here. Okay, so these couple regions that we talked about, the right and the left bank, are further broken down into a grouping of different regions. On the left bank, you'll hear two of them referred to as the Médoc or the Haut Médoc. And then within that, you'll see those broken down even into oftentimes what you would call some of your more prestigious growing regions, which are Saint Estephe, Pauillac, Saint Julien, Margaux, and Pessac-Léognan, which is in Grobs.
There we go.
And here's that picture of the smudge pots. I mean, you can see how it takes a long time to light each one of those, and they have to do that pretty much every night that there's frost until it passes, and they have to do it from about 10 a.m. to 2 or 3 in the morning. So yeah, sorry, 10 p.m. Thanks for catching that. So yeah, incredible amount of work just to try and mitigate frost. There are a few chateaus that can afford air turbines. They cost about 100,000 euros. And those wealthy ones don't have to get up at 2 or 3 in the morning to make sure that the smudge pots are still burning. They just blow the cold air out, probably to somebody else's vineyard who's not too happy with them. So we're going back to, so we're talking about the left bank regions there, and then on the right bank, your famous regions are Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. And so on the left bank, kind of the reason that these areas got broken up more and more is that there was a classification system. I think that Napoleon decided he wanted to put into place, though I could be dating that incorrectly, but I'm 90% sure that's who kind of forced that issue. But they broke down all these chateaus, and they classed them first growth to fifth growth, and the first growths were the best. At the time there were 4. Now they're one other person kind of made it into that first growth range, but really there's not a lot of upward mobility. But having that classification on your chateau to this day kind of makes you a chateau that can sell for a much higher price point, even though the wines of some chateaus now that have worked really hard may be better. That's always something to watch out for when you're buying, and it's a little hard. It makes buying Bordeaux a little more challenging. They've later moved to some other classification systems that maybe aren't as well known.
We're tasting today.
Sorry?
That we're tasting today.
That we're tasting today. The right bank wasn't included in this classification system at all because they were a bunch of hicks for the most part in these people's minds at that point in time. And now they're probably feeling pretty happy because their best wines sell for more. On that left bank, some of the chateaus that you probably more commonly hear of are Margaux, Lafite and Mouton Rothschild, Haut-Brion, and what's the other one I'm missing there? What's the other first growth?
Lafite Rothschild, Mouton Rothschild.
Yeah, it's not either of those. I got those ones.
Latour.
Thanks. And so those are your first growths, and those are wines that are coming onto the market in the $1,000 range every year. And then your second growth, so you'd probably be familiar with some of those names here and there, and they're coming in at $100 a bottle. On the right bank in Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, kind of your big players are Pearce, which sells for thousands of dollars a year and is maybe the most sought after, but Le Pen as well. Angelou, Cheval Blanc, those are kind of your big players and most famous properties in those regions. And since we're kind of in the right bank there, I'll let Pearce kind of take over with Roques as it falls into one of the areas surrounding Saint-Emilion.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm going to just kind of be referencing my notes here because Chateau Roques came into the portfolio right after I left, so this is perfect. They have a relatively small vineyard holding. It's 23 hectares, which equals roughly about 58 acres. Hang on, let me pull up my handy Saint-Emilion guide. Their soils are mainly limestone clay soils with a little bit of broken up kind of shale in there. Their grape varieties are dominantly Merlot, so about 70% of their plantings are Merlot, with 5% Cab Sauv Cab Franc, and then about 25% Cab Sauv. So they have a little bit heavier Cab Sauv than a lot of the right bank producers, but I think that kind of comes through a little bit in their wines as well. The average age of their vines is 30 years, so they've relatively recently replanted. Their estate is about 200 years old, so they've been around for a while. They break up things a little bit by wine that they're producing. So they do hand harvest for their higher wines and their more expensive wines, but they also do machine harvest for some of their more bulk production. And they produce around 1,150 hectoliters per year. Somewhat varying depending on vintage and weather. Their aging is kind of broken up between barrels, vats, and stainless steel fermenters. It looks like about 50% of their aging is no barrel, and therefore a little bit more affordable. And then about 50% is for their higher wines, and is barrel fermented, barrel aged. This is a satellite of Saint Emilion. There are 5 satellites. I even looked up how to pronounce the word before this call, and I still can't pronounce it. It's Poussin. I think something close to that, Saint Emilion. Maybe somebody can school me later with their much better French. Let's see. I have a little bit more information, and then I'm actually going to share a few pictures of Saint Emilion, because the charm of this place is largely that it was built. A lot of the churches were built by the Romans, and it's a gorgeous place to grow grapes.
I didn't say why it's Merlot dominant on the right bank. So you should do it.
Yeah, so Merlot is typically kind of the choice of the right bank. A lot of the soils between the left and the right bank are very much very different. So the soils on the right bank are going to be a lot heavier, a lot wetter, more clay-based soils with a little bit more kind of river silt in them. Where the left bank is going to be a little bit more gravel-based, so better drainage. Cabernet Sauvignon typically likes to have wet or dry feet, so it doesn't like to have wet roots and doesn't do well in those conditions. It also is a lot cooler with wet soil. So the Merlot, being early ripening and early budding, tends to be a little bit better suited for those heavier, wetter, colder soils. Well, I pull this up. Hang on. Right. So this is Chateau Roques that I'm about to drop on you guys here. I actually discovered that you can stay there. It is a functioning hotel, and seems like a reasonable thing to do because it looks pretty awesome. I don't know how much it costs. I didn't dive that far. But from the...
Depends on how much wine you buy, how much it costs.
That probably is accurate. Saint Emilion in general, though, is...
It's a gorgeous area.
And apparently a PDF error. Hang on. That one?
Nope.
Doesn't like that one either. Hang on. Sorry, guys. My computer says that it doesn't like the files that I'm choosing.
Yeah, so like as you said, the right bank's kind of characterized by maybe smaller chateaus and these small towns and churches. On the left bank, because there's been more money in wine longer, you see some very grandiose chateaus. Well, that's not necessarily, all of them. There's very clearly a lot more that's been put into that side of Bordeaux. Almost got it? Well, I want to put it up.
I don't know. It says it needs to be a JPEG or a PDF, and it's definitely a JPEG.
We're also really good with technology. It's our strength.
No, that's not actually true at all. We're great at making wine. Absolutely spectacular. Nope. Okay. Well, you should look up pictures of Saint Emilion. It's beautiful.
And you should go there.
And go there.
And just look at pictures. Just go.
Chateau Roques.
Yeah.
It seems like it's pretty awesome. I'm gonna try this
one
more time.
Drink the wine. Be merry. It'll look even better after a few glasses.
Yeah. Okay. So I should have one.
Nope.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not going to show you pictures of that for reasons that I don't understand. I will say that this wine, I just kind of was doing a little bit of research on the wine.
Now, right now, it's real cheap to stay there.
Yes. Also, they won't let you into the country. So maybe don't put your hopes up too high. So Chateau Roques remains under the ownership of the Sublet family after 200 years. The wine was released from the cellars that are buried deep beneath the chateau and is already drinking really, really well. I think that this, let's see, these are south-facing slopes. This is the 2015. And honestly, is a really beautiful wine. Just to talk about it, I've only actually tasted it twice now.
Let's talk about when you go with your tasting.
But yeah, I'll kind of dive into the tasting presentation here real quick. I think that will load because I accidentally did it earlier.
Before we kind of move on to that, are there any questions on Bordeaux?
Rich and Jeanette, I also will join you.
Yeah, we'll be right there with you guys.
Company.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, actually, we'll just meet there a year from August.
Yeah, exactly. So just to give you guys like a really brief, I kind of tailored this to a little bit of a different skill level set. I'll kind of run you guys through the basics of tasting. I wish I was better at technology. It's really embarrassing.
You're just young enough that it's embarrassing.
Yeah. The thing is I grew up with computers.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to be it's not going to be that long before I ask for help.
I ask Elliot for help sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're assessing a wine, many different factors to kind of take into account. But the place to start is always going to be kind of by looking at it. So the three factors that are on kind of the grid that we use to assess a wine's quality, and this gets more complicated as you get further and further into it, but I'm going to keep it fairly brief. And then if you guys want to do a deeper dive on anything, we can definitely do that. The first things that you're going to be looking for are faults. So is it clear or is it hazy? There are many reasons why it could be either one. And it isn't necessarily an indicator of a fault. Hazy wine could just be an indicator of a very young wine. It could have dissolved gas in it still. It could have turbidity in it, depending on its shipping conditions. Sometimes it can be a fault if it wasn't sealed appropriately, and it can develop kind of a secondary fermentation that can kind of cause some turbidity as well. Really depends and can't necessarily, absolutely guys, hang on just 1 second. It can be, yeah, so there are several reasons. A clear wine though, you're gonna be able to see through no problem. Yeah. Let me just pull it up.
Just pop it in there into the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Today, more and more also, from a clarity standpoint, it's being considered less a fault as more and more winemakers are going to, I don't necessarily want to use the term natural winemaking, but more of us with our winery included are choosing not to filter. which can have its risks, that you can end up with, you're not quite as sterile overall, but you're also, it's allowing for more flavor to stay in the wine. So it's a little bit of a gamble. So sometimes you'll see there'll be remnants of fermentation sometimes that kind of will be in a wine that can kind of appear hazy, and it's made it harder for it to be considered a fault as we've gone forward. Looks like that link should be up there now for you guys if you want to pull that up.
So as James said, it can be an indicator of a few different things. Really small or high quality producers will sometimes go unfined or unfiltered, which can lead to the wines being a little bit hazy. A lot of what filtration does with the wine is it does strip some flavor out at the cost of giving you a very shelf stable product. So if you're not sure, you want to have 20,000 bottles going out there and sitting on a shelf in a retail space, and you don't want to have any that are going to go bad or have problems. And that's kind of the overall rationale, kind of the very brief idea of why you might want to filter, because the filtration can go down to a few microns, and really make sure you're not getting, it's the only way to make sure you're not getting any bacteria in there that won't affect the wine in a really damaging way. You can't put bleach in wine, it doesn't taste good. So the next thing you're going to be kind of assessing is intensity. What that means is kind of how clear and or opaque the wine is from a concentration level. So how deep is that color coming from the core? If you look at it on a white background, how deep is that coming out to the rim, and how far? That's going to tell you kind of basically what the skin thickness is on the grape and what the extraction was. It can tell you a little bit about what the varietal might be. Things like that can kind of give you little hints. Thin-skinned grapes like Pinot Noir, Grenache, Gamay, Merlot on some level isn't going to be a terribly concentrated grape. It is fairly thin, but does have some more concentration than those. Those are going to be varietals that you'll kind of typically see be a very light ruby color. So in the WSET standard, it's going to be pale, medium, or deep. Basically what you're looking at there. Then you're going to say what color the wine is. This is probably one of the easier parts, where you're looking at white, rosé, or red. This is a red wine. Pro tip there. I would call this probably, this is a medium. This is kind of a tweener. So on this grid and the level 2 sheet, it doesn't really give you an option for medium plus or medium minus. I don't think this is quite a pronounced or deep color, but I think it is probably medium plus in nature, or medium, we'll call it for now. The guardrails are pretty wide on the WSET level 2.
Until I get really picky.
Yeah. That's kind of where that one goes. Whites and rosés, to give you kind of just a little bit, rosés can be a little bit challenging to say color-wise, because it really can depend on a lot of factors of why it's deeper or not.
We can talk about it in the next series.
But we can address that on the next series for sure. White wines, lemon, gold, amber, a lot of that depends on the age more so than the grape or the wine. Also, oak contact and things like that. So the next thing you're going to do when you're tasting wine is you're going to smell it. This is for a few reasons. The first thing you're going to kind of look at is the condition. So you're assessing whether it has any, obvious faults, whether it smells like, musty basement or farmyard or nail polish, things like that. When you smell, a really good tip that I got is always smell with your eyes closed and with your mouth open. It looks like you're really enjoying it, but it also opens up your sensory perception a little bit more, so you can just really take in a lot of that. I will answer that in just a couple of minutes, but that's actually a really good question. So as you're doing that, the intensity of the smell is an important factor. So bricking, actually, I'll just address that right now. Bricking happens and kind of goes and fades to garnet. Blue pigmentation is the first thing that's going to fall out of a wine.
So like
yeah, so yes, James just said Syrah, Carmenere, you're going to see very purple. Malbec is another one that's like really, really bright, dark purple. And those blue pigmentations are some of the first to fall out with bottle age as tannins polymerize. Everything kind of starts to bind together and fall out of the wine. So when you get sediment, some of that color is coming out there. Bricking tends to happen as the wine clarifies and falls down. The orange and kind of dark brick hues, and as oxidation occurs, are the last ones to fall out. They're kind of the most stable to stay in there. So on the nose, you're going to look for intensity. So for me, the way I assess intensity is I'll usually give the glass a swirl, which is basically exposing the wine to oxygen and releasing some of the volatile compounds. And I will, depending on the wine, I will stick my nose about 2 inches away from the glass, see if I smell anything. If I'm not going in, I'll kind of go a little bit further. And that really, if it's really pronounced intensity, you're going to be able to smell it from several inches away. It's going to be really, really out there and loud. As the wine kind of goes, if it's a medium intensity, you're going to kind of have to stick your nose in the glass. And if it's low intensity, you're going to have to really kind of almost struggle to smell it. It's going to be kind of very challenging to get anything off of it. Intensity can be a qualifier of good quality. It's kind of an indicator to say this wine has good concentration. It's very lifted, grape varietal dependent as well. I find Cabernet Sauvignon to be a fairly intense smelling grape varietal. Carmenere is another one that's like really just kind of out there. White wine wise, Sauvignon Blanc I think is a really good answer. Is like the one that you're just like, wow, I know what that is. So, and then you're going to be testing or smelling for aroma characteristics. So obviously that's, I think, the most kind of basic one. You're just going to figure out what you're smelling, and it's probably the hardest to quantify, but that's where the grid can kind of come in handy, where you're like looking at it and saying, okay, I'm smelling red fruit, I'm smelling black fruit. Okay, what red or black fruit? What spices am I smelling? And these things can kind of indicate primary. We break it down into several subsections of primary, secondary, and tertiary characters. Primary are going to be your bright fruits, floral scents, vegetation, anything like that, which are going to be kind of driven by fermentation and the fruit. Secondary smells are going to be kind of your vanilla, your baking spice, your clove, anything effectively that came from the aging of the wine. So oak vessels, malolactic fermentation is another good one. And then tertiary is what are those smells developing as wines age. So really kind of cigar box, tobacco, forest floor, mushroom, all of those are kind of going to come from the wine actually being exposed slowly to microoxygenation and aging. And so when we say primary, it's usually kind of referential to a youthful wine. If somebody says a wine is smelling very primary or youthful, it's kind of saying this is really loud fruit, it's very fruit forward, things like that. On to the palate, the part where you actually get to taste the wine. James and I regularly will shut down tasting rooms because we're just standing there talking about what we smell. You don't even taste it. They're like, do you guys need the next one? We're like, no, go away. So you're gonna check for a few different things. So the first thing that we'll look for, especially the WSET, I should say, is a very note-heavy organization. They like when you write things down. So as you're writing your tasting note, the first thing you're going to check for is it sweet? Is it dry? So dryness oftentimes can kind of be confused with tannin. So when you're talking to a person who doesn't necessarily have a wine background, dryness is actually in reference to how sweet it is. The tannins can kind of impact the drying sensation in your mouth. So when you kind of put your tongue to the roof of your mouth and you feel that kind of gritty feeling, or on the, better yet, even like on your lip, above your teeth, on your gums. That's where I really kind of sense tannins. And that will give you a good indicator. Dryness is, if you say a wine is dry, that just means that there's not any residual sugar left in the wine, or not perceptible levels of residual sugar left in the wine to kind of sweeten it up.
So like the Martinez Pinot Grigio we had in there would be one that would fall into the off-dry category.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else that we've had it would probably be considered dry.
Mm-hmm.
Or very, very close to dry.
Yeah, and I would say oftentimes you won't encounter very many wines that are kind of in the medium sweet category. There are certainly some, I think some of your more bulk commercial brands, Moscato d'Asti is probably kind of in that range. Apothic might, I don't know if that would fall out of off dry. It might, it's kind of a tweener. And then sweet, actually some of your champagnes in a high quality spectrum, some of those champagnes are going to have more sweetness and more sugar to balance out acidity. So they would be classified from a grams per liter as medium sweet, but don't necessarily taste very sweet.
So more dry doesn't inherently mean more alcohol. It could mean that, but you could have a really low sugar in the grapes, mm-hmm. and it could be fermented to dry and still only have 6% alcohol. Or you could have a grape that's really high in sugar and you fermented it to dry and it could have 16% alcohol. Right. So that has to do a little bit more with how much sugar the grape has. So they don't necessarily graph in a straight line.
Yeah, I think we kind of covered it a little bit earlier, kind of the bricks or sugar content. I can't remember what presentation it was in. But basically the ripeness level of a grape is dependent. Some other European scales kind of measure it based on potential ABV. So when you convert bricks into a potential ABV, effectively a lot of the Washington grapes, the reason you're getting wines that are 14 to 15.5% alcohol is because they are riper, because we're in such a warm climate. Same thing with a lot of the Napa Valley wines or California wines. You're getting higher alcohols because you're getting riper grapes. It used to be that Bordeaux, you wouldn't see many that were above 12 or maybe 13%. 12.5 was really, really common. And now you're starting to see, 14-ish percent on a pretty regular basis as the grapes are just riper. So you as a winemaker, there are things you can do to decrease potential alcohol. In this country, Bordeaux, there isn't a lot, but historically it hasn't been a concern for them because they were more concerned about being able to get it right and keep it healthy. So on to sort of the perceptibility of acidity. This is when you taste a wine and you're trying to kind of figure out what the acidity is, you're going to be trying to figure out how much it's actually making you salivate. So I will detect acidity kind of on the sides of my mouth and the cheeks. And on the tip of the tongue. So it can be kind of this is kind of a difficult one, but and really honestly probably easier to detect when you're spitting. When you're really drooling a lot, it's an indication that the wine is very high in acid. So acidity and sugar levels will typically be kind of inversely proportional in a grape. So higher acidity typically means lower alcohol. And vice versa. Again, it's kind of the Wild West. So U.S. wines aren't necessarily going to be as straightforward.
And Cab Sauv can be a notable exception.
Yeah, and Cab Sauv can really carry on with its acidity. It's one of the reasons I think it's been such a prolific grape worldwide, is it keeps its high acid and its flavor character in really almost any condition that you grow it in. It's perceptibly Cabernet Sauvignon-like. So yeah, that's acidity. Tannin, I think Janine, you asked about that a little bit. So tannin, again, to kind of give you an idea, is the way you're going to be able to detect that is going to be, for me, it's the drying sensation that you get. So you can also get it in tea leaves, coffee, anything that basically has sort of that structural character that's going to kind of be in there. all of this is drawn from the color and the grape skins. So tannins are all extracted from that in the fermentation process. And depending on skin thickness and berry size, you will have higher or lower tannins. So what happens with that is you'll be able to really detect it on the roof of your mouth and on the gums. So I feel it like right here on the front of my teeth and between my lips. And that's where you can kind of say like, this is very high in tannin. Things like Cabernet, like young Cabernet Sauvignon and Nebbiolo. There are some grapes that have extremely high tannin content, and it's one of, I think, the most challenging things for people to kind of adapt to as they get used to drinking wine, and can be very off-putting for people who don't drink a lot of wine. They are really like, what is this? I don't like it. And yes, and so and James just said that it also kind of depends on age. So high tannins typically will age better than a low tannin wine. Yeah, and then they also will smooth out. So again, part of what I was saying with the bricking of colors is those tannins will polymerize and start to create longer protein chains, which create a softer mouthfeel when they're kind of getting in there. So you're getting less gritty sensation and a much smoother character.
Break down the tannins into feel. Break down the tannins into feel.
So yeah, so and you can get many different kind of descriptors that go along with tannins, and as you kind of get further into tasting, the WSET expects you to kind of be able to describe the character of the tannins. So sometimes you'll hear wines described as gritty or grippy, almost sand-like. Sometimes they're very velvety and smooth and soft. It really kind of depends on the grape and the wine, and really what you're perceiving as you kind of go through. Anything you would add there?
I mean, the one that we get here in Washington a lot is dusty tannin.
Yep.
And it really does, if you compare them to other tannins, it really does kind of feel dusty. It's that weird tactile scent kind of sensation.
You'll get that in notably Rutherford. They're in Napa Valley. They call it the Rutherford dust. It sounds ridiculous, but as you kind of go through and you taste those wines blind on different things, it is noticeable that it is very dusty in nature. All right. So again, so body is another one that's kind of a challenging thing for people to really be able to discern right out the gate. Body, I like to reference, this is back from my Starbucks days. The easiest way to tell how a wine's body is characterized is to actually put, it's through milk. So if you put non-fat milk, 2% milk, whole milk, half and half, and then a heavy cream next to each other, think about how different those feel in your mouth. And that is a really good indicator of how to, if you do that exercise, you'll understand palate weight in a different way. So the wine is really kind of, in a full-bodied wine, it's much heavier. It kind of coats your mouth in a different way. So the difference between a light and a heavy are going to be very obvious to you once you're like, oh yeah, the difference between non-fat milk and heavy cream is like insane. That's my favorite way, and probably the easiest way to just really hammer it out in a day, and really can help calibrate your palate to what the body is. Flavor characteristics, again, you're kind of looking for those primary, secondary, and tertiary notes. So you're going to kind of, in your note, figure out what fruits you're tasting, red, black, blue, blueberries, pomegranates, things like that. Secondary is going to be kind of your oak, toast, or malolactic characters, which are going to be kind of your buttery and diacetyl and things like that. Let's see. And then tertiary, kind of like we said, a lot of the time, if you have a really, really good nose with wine, you're not going to taste a whole lot that's new. You're gonna be kind of confirming what you're smelling, which when you're tasting with a lot of sommeliers and things like that, they don't even say the tasting note. They're like, yep, palate confirms the nose, move on. The finish is the easiest one I have to tell you about. It's how long you taste the wine after you've tasted the wine. It's really, when you have a wine that is really, really concentrated and high quality, it can really just stick with you for several minutes after you've tasted it. I've had wines actually relatively recently where I tasted one wine and then tasted the next one, and I could still taste the wine before that. After I spit the other one out, I was like, I still taste the other wine. Like it was insane. It's kind of ridiculous. And then overall conclusions from your very detailed notes that you guys have been taking is kind of leads you to a quality assessment. Is it faulty? Is it not good at all? We don't want to drink it. Is it kind of poorly made, which is almost borderline faulty? And then you're looking at the most common ones, or which are going to be acceptable, good, very good, and outstanding.
Outstanding is pretty rare.
Outstanding is pretty rare. Good and very good are really kind of a large amount of wine. And probably the vast majority of wines are acceptable, and that's fine. That is what they are. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just not meant to be super high quality. They're meant to be drunk young, probably with some chill and with a lot of friends. I had a master of wine, and his daughter's favorite wine was Yellowtail Shiraz, and she drank it cold and was very happy. Let's see. It's a little bit of a challenging thing to say, Janine. The wines that you kind of enjoy or love 3/4 of the way through and then don't like the finish, it's sometimes I'd say characteristically you just don't like the wine. It isn't, one of the hardest things as an objective taster is figuring out where your line of I just really like this crosses into a quality assessment. And that I'd say comes from many, many hours and days of just tasting through things and palate calibration with other tasters. So, exposing yourself to a lot of people and a lot of wines and kind of pushing your comfort zone can be really, really helpful. I've found that wines on initial, tastes and after many, many times of tasting them, I actually started to like them. I think Fino Sherry is now one of my favorite wines to have, and I despised it when I first started tasting it. I would have written a terrible note on every single one of them I ever had. But after just kind of being exposed over and over to those wines, it's really a kind of can be an eye-opening thing. But the vast majority of tasting and being a good taster is calibrating and just figuring out kind of what are your benchmarks, what are the things that are represented in it. And again, blind tasting can be a very challenging thing because you are tasting for, you can't just give someone any wine in the world and say, okay, figure out what that is. We're really kind of tasting with the training wheels on, even at the highest levels of, that has to be a classic representation of a varietal from a specific place. And so we've determined that certain grape varietals in certain climates and certain places and certain winemaking techniques behave in a certain way. And so the kind of idea of blind tasting is being able to pull that characteristic out of the grape and say, okay, objectively, this has high acid, very pronounced nose of green pepper and grass. Okay,
let's just walk through this one. Or we could ask them what people think.
Wait, actually, yeah. Now that we've tasted through the wine, does anybody kind of want to tell me what? Does anybody want to jump in and assess the wine? We used to, in class, break it down into, someone would break down the appearance, someone would break down the nose, and someone would break down the palate. There are no totally wrong answers.
I think you guys can raise your hand on that, under that more thing, if you guys actually want to give it a shot, or you can just write in a note if you want more anonymity, at least a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You should hear some of the stuff we got in class a few times. So
you should hear some of the things I've said
or
about wine.
I might say them in a few minutes.
Yeah. I for a while, this was right before when James and I were doing probably 70 wines a week. We're just blind tasting each other and figuring out what we were going to do when we were studying for our exams. And for a while, I every time I tasted a Chardonnay, I called it Riesling. Those are wildly different grapes. I don't know what it was in my head, but it happened multiple times. And James was making prolific amounts of fun of me for it because it was stupid. It was totally ridiculous. But I, like, every single time I was like, I wrote this note and it is a Riesling. And he's like, there's oak on that. You don't really oak Rieslings. And so, like, I was convinced. And then we sit down for our first exam. We were about to taste 12 wines. Everybody's super tense. And I sit down and it's a Riesling. And I'm sitting there just like absolutely freaking out because I'm like, oh my God, what if it's a Chardonnay? And I just switched them in my head. And I'm like talking myself into everything. And they're finally, the last one was like an absolute banker because it was a flight of 3 Rieslings and it was kind of a what region is this from flight. And thankfully it was enough of one where I was absolutely sure and I was positive that it was what it was. But yeah, I felt real dumb a few times.
Okay, this one. No takers.
No takers. Everybody's a little too scared. I understand. Monica,
I can go. You
Perfect.
kids.
Okay, do it. Go.
All right.
Okay, this is what I have to say. I feel like it's tanniny. I get the grit. It's definitely got a higher acidity because I'm salivating like a madman. I taste black cherry and currant and nasturtium. Like the flower, that orangey flower.
I love nasturtium. It's one of my favorite.
Yeah, it's got a tang to it. Okay, now you guys assess my thinking.
Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of a genetic component. For me, it's a little bit, to be a good taster, it's a little less genetic than people who are good tasters would like you to think. A lot of it's, I treat it or tell people it's more like weightlifting. You don't go into the gym and try and bench 400 pounds first day. And if you do that, you're going to hurt yourself. And if you try and make a guess on your first day of drinking wine, it's pretty hard to do it right. If you do enough reps over time, you're probably going to get good at it. That doesn't mean you'll be the best. And in some case, you'll hear about super tasters. Most of them aren't somms. And the reason for that is a lot of times it actually is too intense and it kind of clouds them a little bit. So there are definitely DNA components that can change taste, but it does play a role. But
but that's part of the reason why I say it's all about calibration, because everybody's got a subjective experience, and it's based off of how they can smell and taste. And so when you sit in front or in a group of people and everybody says, well, that's a red wine. Like, everybody looks at this wine and says, okay, that's a red wine. Like, that's one of those things where on a base level, we've already societally agreed this is the color red. So from there, it's sort of saying, okay, well, I taste black cherries. I taste, red fruit. I taste nasturtiums. Not a lot of people have necessarily tasted nasturtiums, but I think, that's one of those calls. Yeah, I think that's one of those calls that I'm like, oh yeah, like, that's there. So I think it really, like, when I say calibration, I mean like calibrating your palate to a group of people, and whether you're experiencing that taste on a totally different level, you're still agreeing upon a taste that is in the wine. And so it kind of, and like Jim said, this is very repetition based. And, if you've never had a Cabernet Sauvignon, then when you're tasting it blind, there's no reason why you would understand why that was Cabernet Sauvignon. And so there's a lot of factors that kind of go into it that make it challenging. And certainly, your physical ability to detect smells and tastes is going to be a major contributor to this.
Yeah, having a deviated septum is going to make it real hard.
Yeah, I have a deviated septum.
Just made it that much harder.
But yeah, so yeah, there you go. So
run through it.
I would say that was actually a good
Jeanette, Rich and Jeanette. I thought that was a good assessment that you guys had as well.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you walk through it, and I'll walk through these next 3.
Yeah.
we'll get these people on the road.
So I'd say this wine has a kind of a medium intensity. It's not jumping out of the glass to me, but it's not hard to detect. It's just sort of there. I get kind of crushed raspberry, strawberry, black cherry, cedar, a little bit of like, it's kind of a peppery, a little vanilla. Yeah, I like it. On the palate, I'd say it's dry. This is, I'd say, medium plus acidity. Medium plus tannin. Check body again. Sometimes you have to go back for that. Mm-hmm. I'd say this is kind of squarely in the medium to medium plus body.
Yeah.
I'd say medium plus intensity of flavor. Again, kind of confirming the palate or nose. So cherry, cedar. There's kind of a jammy fruit component to this wine. A little bit kind of almost dairy-like in its character. Almost the way that I heard a master sommelier describe this once is kind of like a Danimals, like blackberry yogurt. So it's like you got this kind of yogurt with fruit at the bottom. I get a very kind of dairy-forward character in this wine, which is an indicator of just malolactic conversion. So it's got a high lactic acid content, which is pretty typical, I think, in this kind of this quality level of Bordeaux. It's got a really, I'd say, very good finish. It lasts on the palate for quite a long time. I didn't address the alcohol. The alcohol is high, I'd say. Is it high? Where do we land? 14. It's 14. 14 is the earliest indicator that you can call high. So I'd say I scraped by. I'd say quality level this wine is very good. It's not meant to age for a particularly long time, but I'd say 2 or 3 years it would be lovely. And yeah, I like it.
Yeah, it's a good one. Good one.
Yeah,
for price.
Pearce, yeah, I would pair fabulously with lots of things, but like a beef stew would be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Pearce poured me 3 wines here, and I'm gonna take my best guess at some of these, and you guys are welcome to watch or run away as you see fit, whether it's interesting. As you guys can kind of see, there's a white and 2 reds. So if I was looking at this in exam condition, I would be going for the white first, with one notable exception, that if I smell it and it smells sweet, I would put it to the end, because that'll throw your palate calibration off. So when I pick this up, we'll kind of go off of that grid that he was looking at. When I pick this up, to me, this is, it's clear. I'm not quite sure why it has a little bit of particulate in it, but we're looking at kind of a pale to kind of almost medium lemon in color. It doesn't. I'm gonna guess that the particulate's not a fault, and that it's kind of not throughout the wine. It just kind of settled out. This wine has, it's very pronounced. It flies out of the glass, and it's definitely clean, not faulted. When he was talking about faults, he was talking about musty cardboard. That's when you hear somebody refer to a wine as corked. That's the smell you're going to get. I talked about farmyard or Band-Aid. That's Brettanomyces, which you catch in beer more, and it does show up in wine. In wine, it's more considered a fault than in beer. Some people really like it. What's the other one? Oh, and then nail polish is or volatile acidity is an infection from Acetobacter, which is common when you catch a wine from oxidation. This is totally clean, doesn't have any of those characteristics on it. Yeah, so nose is pronounced. It has some very distinguishing characteristics to me. You're looking at really ripe stone fruit like peach, apricot, nectarine. The distinguishing characteristics for this one are it has what you would call petrol, a little rubber hose, and I'm gonna call it petrichor, which is that smell you get. Yeah, that smell you get when rain on wet pavement. There's very few grapes that pick up that petrol note, and with this grape, it tends to become increasingly strong. I mean, I assume that it's this. I'd assume it's this grape.
I was gonna say, is it?
So on the palate here, I'm going to try and use some of these characteristics to kind of flesh out if it is the grape I think it is. It's medium. It's very dry, like bone dry. Kind of medium to very light body, searing acidity. It's very high, which is kind of what I was looking for to kind of confirm that petrol note. I would expect to have very high acidity in it. Alcohol's medium, probably medium. So those notes lead me to Riesling. This is kind of one of those ones where you'd be shocked if it was anything but that. And then the producer, because it's so pronounced and concentrated, the quality is probably very high. Regionally, I'm going to say it's unlikely to be, well, it could be Australia or the US. It's very unlikely to be anything but a German producer or an Alsatian, because the alcohol is a little higher. I would end up in a Cru Riesling in Alsace, France.
Super good news for you. This is a Cru Riesling in France. So you got that one right. That one I gave to him knowing that he would smell it and know what it was.
I love Riesling, so that's helpful.
James, what's the alcohol percentage? We'll see if he gets this one right.
Feels like it's like 12 and a half. It's balanced up the acidity, making it a little hard. Somewhere in that ballpark.
13 and a half.
13 and a half.
You said medium,
so it's high.
and medium is.
It feels lower than that to me, but
yeah.
But that's good.
One. Bang on.
So I look at two here. We've kind of moved into red wine, but this is, I don't know if you guys can kind of see, like comparing that. I don't know if this comes across as darker. Yeah, so you can see this one's a little bit darker. So this one's pretty light in color. So right off the bat, you're looking probably at thin-skinned red grapes. This one's far less intense than the first wine. Age-wise, there's no indicators that this has any significant aging on it. It's very light, ruby, no bricking that he talked about. I'm looking at kind of aromas of raspberry, kind of pomegranate-y, cranberry, kind of I'm going to say acidic red fruits, and some strawberry characters there. There's not a lot of secondary or tertiary characters that he discussed earlier. I'm gonna go with high acidity again, kind of medium plus to high alcohol, very light tannin. Kind of a bit more body than I'd expect. Kind of put it in that medium plus range. And then again, this is a very dry wine. There's no residual sugar on it. Kind of when I'm looking at varietals here, I'm thinking Pinot Noir, Gamay, Grenache. For me, there's some contradictory things going on here. It kind of tastes more. Like maybe kind of a medium quality Pinot Noir, but feels kind of more like Grenache. So for me, because of the fruitiness, I would lean towards either a California Pinot or maybe Australian Grenache. And gun to my head, I would settle on probably California Pinot Noir, just because in a warm year, I think it could end up like this, and it would taste maybe more in these red fruit with limited spice or secondary characters. Nope, that's too bad.
So guys, this is an Australian Grenache. This is called the Villain and the Vixen. So it's kind of a fun label by far. It's I would say when I chose this one, I thought maybe it was going to be a little bit more of a classic representation of an Australian Grenache. It does have some structural components that are a little confusing and disjointed, like James was saying. California Pinot is a really good guess.
I wouldn't be unhappy with that. If I guessed that, that wouldn't kill me.
I absolutely adore these guys' labels. It's so cool.
That's a cool label.
I have sold that wine, I think, a lot just because of how cool the label is. Yeah. Okay.
So third wine, as we talked about, when I compare it to the last one, it's much more concentrated in color. Still youthful, but it's showing maybe a little bit of age on it. It's not bricking, but I would go from ruby to garnet, which is maybe not the most distinct thing, but that's kind of where the designation is in the WSET.
I just to interject there too, it is very much not, the WSET does not follow what the actual jewelry stones look like. My wife has given me endless grief. She's like, that is not what a ruby looks like and not what a garnet looks like. They have a color spectrum that they provide that says, this is why calibration is important. They have pictures of wine of what is garnet, what's ruby, what concentration of each. So you have to go by their standard.
Yeah.
I'm aware, we've sort of all agreed to call it what it is, and that's where he's kind of going from. So just a heads up.
If I'm going to look at varietals right off the bat here, I'm going to eliminate Syrah, Malbec, and probably Carmenere to a lesser extent, just because there's no blue pigmentation in this wine. This one is more pronounced than the last one, but now it's pronounced as a first. It's probably going to, I lean towards marking it as pronounced on an exam. We're looking at, it smells old world. And when I say that, it's kind of because it's got a little bit of that bready character that we were talking about, where there's a little bit of that medicinal, almost like rubbery Band-Aid type smell. Sounds like it would smell really bad. It doesn't, but it usually comes through in a slightly less hygienic winemaking style, which tends to be old world. So you're going to start ruling out, again, not that it couldn't be a strange producer, but you're going to start ruling out U.S., South America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa could sneak in there, even as a kind of a new world country. They kind of can throw the style. You're looking at aromas of blackberry, black currant, cedar, tobacco leaf. It's kind of what I'm getting overall. Not a ton of barrel influence, though. I suspect that there was spent time in barrel. It's a much bigger style of wine. Very dry. high acidity, high tannin. We're gonna go with high alcohol as well. Yeah, and very full bodied. Same flavors for the most part that you're getting, with maybe a little bit more floral. You may be getting some like rose petal type character on this wine. To make conclusions due to the acidity and the tannin, I'm probably looking predominantly. I'm going to look at predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, or blends that would have Cab Sauv. Structurally, this could also be Nebbiolo, which would be your Barolo Barbaresco from Northwest Italy. But it's very dark compared to what you'd expect those wines to look like. So
Those brick early.
yeah, and they brick early. So just on site, you would rule that one out. We talked a lot about Bordeaux tonight, and my gut feeling is that this is probably a relatively well-made Cab Sauv dominant Bordeaux blend. Probably, I guess it has a few years on it. It's not super young, but I would think it's probably in the range of like 2012-ish. Could be a little newer than that, but somewhere in that range.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
It is. They'll be happy that you said this. This is a Cabernet Sauvignon. However, it is not from Bordeaux. It's a South African wine. This is a winery called Morgenster. Now, the trick with Morgenster is they actually contract with a winemaker from Bordeaux who makes Cheval Blanc, and he comes down and does their blending. So the fact that James kind of mentioned South Africa and then said it could kind of lean into those, and then like he's picking up on all of the things, and then just didn't quite land it in the dismount. But he got all of the things right there. I mean, that's one of the other challenging things to put together with blind tasting is you're like, okay, now I've got all of this information. What do I do with it, and how do I put it together? And some people, by instinct can do it, and it's a lot of repetition. That's all I would say. So, but yeah, good job.
With that, for not blind tasting too much lately.
Yeah, like twice in last year.
That's a good flight.
Yeah. I want to thank Emily Dunphy off camera. She helped me select the wines. I was kind of going over all of the wines that were kind of on the table. I wasn't actually there physically to be able to pick them, so she was my eyes and ears, and helped keep them a secret from James.
Cool. Yeah, they did a pretty good job of keeping secrets.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for me being in the room a bunch.
Yeah, it was good. Blind tasting's fun.
Blind tasting is fun. I'd be happy to show any or all of you how to do it over time. It's a cool experience. I have a sales rep that I work with who's been in the game a long time, and I put him in front of our wineries wines and then 3 wines that he sells, and he didn't pull any of the ones that he sold out by taste, but he did mark a couple. He marked a couple of them that were really high that are relatively inexpensive wines, and he's like, I'll never show anybody that wine without a brown bag on it again, because it's a fantastic wine if you take all your
preconceived notions.
Yeah. And so tasting wine, it's really easy to talk yourself into something's good or bad just by what you already know about it. And blind tasting it's a trip and a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and very humbling, because you learned it. Being wrong is okay, and you're going to be wrong a lot.
Yeah, and also preconceived notions are some of your deepest, darkest enemies with some of these things. Like you're like, yeah, I don't like X, Y, and Z wine. And then you taste it blind and you're like, this is the best wine I've ever tasted. And somebody's like, ha, in your face, sucker. Yeah, it happens a lot. And you know, it's one of those things where you know, a lot of people, you know, post the kind of gotcha videos of sommeliers looking like idiots tasting expensive wines or being convinced that they're tasting expensive wines. Blind taste, like I said, blind tasting is you are limiting yourself to, you know, still a very large spectrum of wines, but you're still saying, I am sort of landing in the bandwidth of classic representations, traditional representations of a specific varietal from a certain group of places, right? So about 20 or 30 countries, plenty of subregions within those, and plenty of varietals within that. That's more than enough information for us to try and digest. And then, you know, for people to kind of come in and say, well, I poured that $6 wine in that more expensive bottle and you thought you liked it. You know, it turns out that the human brain is really good at tricking yourself. So if you can buy one expensive bottle and have somebody else fill it with a cheap wine, and if you think you like it, then good. But I've also, in blind tastings, I've tasted, you know, a $200 prestige cuvee champagne next to a $7 German sect, and there was no one in the class that agreed that the German sect was better. Like, everybody was like, that champagne or that wine, because we didn't even know what it was, they were like, that wine's better. And he's like, it's a bummer that you think that, because if you liked the other one, you would be able to buy it. The other one you're only going to get to enjoy a couple of times. So, you know, I don't like to judge people. Like, if they like cheap wine, good on them.
If you like Franzia, you're in business, man.
Yeah,
you can drink a lot of Franzia.
Yeah, you can afford to buy that forever. But you know, that's one of the sort of curses of developing your palate is I now don't get a terrible amount of enjoyment from cheap wine.
There are the occasional cheap wines, though, that are still awesome.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's saying, like, there's a lot of wine that I think punches well above its weight class in quality, and you know, it costs $12, and I'm like, that should be a $30 wine. I don't know what they're thinking. Or, you know, sometimes, you know, regionally dependent. I mean, the Georgian wine that we're going to have in this next group, you know, they're wholesaling that in this country for $8. And so it would retail for about 12, and it's a 2014 vintage, and it's
a great wine for that price.
Beautifully, and it's phenomenal.
Or like this Riesling that I just tasted.
Yep.
That wholesales around 30, so probably sells for, you know, $45. That's a wine that in another region, and if it's a different grape, is quality wise probably more like $100 or $200 wine. There's some outstanding wines.
Yeah, wine is very also subject to fashionability, and so, you know, you'll go in ebbs and flows. You know, right now, Riesling, right now rosé is incredibly fashionable, and people are selling it and making serious rosés and selling it for good money. But I would say, you know, some of the ones that suffer from their image are Riesling, Chardonnay, because there was a lot of very cheap, poor made Riesling that was sweet, flooded the market,
especially in my parents' age demographic.
Yeah, Limbrusco is another one that was just like, you know, flooded the market, or Chianti, another one. But Merlot, Riesling, Chardonnay, you know, you get these kind of stereotypes built in, and so everybody thinks that California Chardonnay is the only way that Chardonnay is made. I'd say it's, you know, one of the best, if not the best, white wine grape varietal on the planet.
As a somm, those are probably 3 of my top 6 grape varietals, and they sell terribly.
Yeah, and you know, Merlot suffers very specifically from being just called out in the movie Sideways, and it's literally, we as a group of sommeliers, I've had 100+ sommeliers in a room, and we talk about why Merlot isn't selling. Because we're all like, this is so good, and it's just kind of gets this reputation.
That being said, he was right. Pinot Noir is probably better a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and so it's sort of just subject to that subjective fashion style points for, you know, you get what you get. Yeah, and you know, some wines are capable of the opposite, where everybody thinks that, you know, cab is king, and there's a lot of crappy cab out there. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Any other questions before we let you guys go for the night?
I like this.
Oh.
Everybody should just listen to me talk all the time. Great.
Yeah, you guys are most welcome to putting this together. We, like I said, we really enjoyed doing it. I'll have more information out to you guys about this next series here. We're gonna try and put a PDF together.
We're not going to try. We're going to do it. It's
to make
gonna
it
happen.
easier to find the Zoom links and so on and so forth. And we'll try and be even a little bit more prepared for this next one as soon as we get through this whole winery
Maggie,
thing on our sets.
You are absolutely right. Thank you. We are geniuses.
False.
We just wasted a lot of time and money on
Wasted. That's
one
also
very
false.
specific subject.
Yeah.
If any of you guys spent as much time as we did, you'd
be pretty good at it too.
You would know a lot.
But yeah, so anyways, I guess we'll catch you guys again Saturday because we're getting ready to roll here. And on this next 6, I'm looking forward to, I think I probably like the wines in the, right, I'm going to say this because there are a couple of really good wines in the first one. I might like these next 6 better than I like the first 6.
Mm-hmm.
There's some really cool stuff in this next one.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll start off with rosé. Be aware for a couple of you, we're going to be talking about 2 different ones because most of you have the Terre de Dame, the La Diva rosé.
Yeah.
But a few of you have the Henry Bernard Steph rosé because
we ran out.
There's no more of the other one in this country, so we got more people in on this than we expected. So same region. Also a really good producer. Same grape varietals, yeah. As similar as we could get.
So we'll have the winemaker from La Diva, Terre de Dame, come on. James and I are actually going to be doing a video call with her tomorrow morning, and we're recording it. The time change was a little awkward, so 7:30 our time would be in the middle of the night for her, and she's working hard in the vineyards. So we're going to be mindful of that. So it's going to be a little bit of a different structure. James and I will kind of handle a lot of the basic Q&A with her tomorrow morning. And then James and I will be on to kind of talk about what the video is and we can answer direct questions about the wine and kind of do a little bit of a hybrid from what tonight was and then what that's going to be.
The other European producer, I might make her get up in the middle of the night and she might do it.
She might do it because she's amazing. Yeah. I don't know this winemaker personally yet, so I trust she's amazing as well, but I hesitate to ask her to wake up in the middle of the night just for us.
But yeah, thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, guys.
South African cab. It's a half dirty trick.
I pulled a Morgan Star on you. Well, it was really funny because everybody's like, we're drinking Morgan Star tonight. I actually tried to pull the Natita caps off.
I said that?
Yeah. Did you know there?
When?
No. Yes.
Good.
Oh,
no,
yesterday. Yeah.
Good.
Oh, yeah.
No,
I didn't say that.
Great wine.
I forgot about that.
No, I was trying to, I don't think you had a Natita because the Natita Capsav is so benchmark South African. Unmute them.
I'm yeah, there she
Oh,
goes.
there we go. Hi.
Hi. That was great.
Hi.
That was hi, Emily.
Hi. I've been sitting in the corner watching.
Out of sight, huh?
Yes.
She was hurting the amp.
Yeah, that was great. That was great.
I like wine tasting. I think there's Greg. Oh, he went away. I know there. He turned himself off mute.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Say hello.
Betsy and Will are still there.
Wait,
Yeah, Betsy and Will are still hiding. They don't like to speak.
Well, yeah, well, they can't. They have like an old tower PC, like an e-machine.
Is that what it is? I know exactly the corner of your house it's in too.
And the monitor is like the size of like a small truck.
We should really don't.
Whoa, that is.
Am I coming on?
Oh yeah, there you are.
Yeah. Oh, let me turn the light on. I guess I'm in the dark.
Yeah, you are in the dark.
It's upstairs.
Yeah, he is upstairs.
There he is.
Yeah, I'm in the room.
Hi.
I'm in the cave.
Looking sharp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're out there living the dream.
Yeah.
How's it feel to be like on the only place where there's only like 2 cases of coronavirus?
'Coronavirus? Yeah, we had the last case. There's 14 cases reported on Orcas, and the last one
It
was
got-
I was going to say, do you guys get together in biohazard suits and throw them in the water? Like what's the
what's that?
do you guys just get together in biohazard suits and throw them in the water?
Yeah, exactly.
Or,
Yeah.
or do you
Well, we
take
don't
them-
let them report. If they
Or
have
take-
it, they're just gone.
or do you just take them to the vet and be like, treat them?
Yeah.
Do whatever you're going to do.
Well, I'm the doctor and I'm the vet.
Oh,
Oh, dear.
I got my backhoes working overtime.
Uh-oh. No.
Eric says if you bury the bodies under a fence line, it's harder to see from satellites. So
Good point.
Oh.
Yeah, so
You know-
you would never do that, though. Don't
You know,
worry about
people are
that.
listening to this. And